everybody. Oh, come on. We know normally we say, hey, Pete. Let's try one more time. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Pete.
Oh, that's a little bit better. Today we're going to be making a custom Phoenix Force, the Energy Firebird behind her, because we all know that Phoenix Jean Grey is a total badass. So let's take a look at that. First thing we want to do is get a good reference photo. I grabbed this one offline. No matter how good of an artist you are, it's always easier when you can actually take a look at what you're drawing. Next up is our list of supplies. The first thing you're going to need is a clear plastic sheet like what I'm holding in front of me. If you collect action figures like I do, you probably have a ton of these laying around. We also have some Liquitex acrylic paints. There's burnt sienna, cad red medium, yellow medium, white, and then later I'm also going to use some black. I'm using an orange Sharpie and of course a glue gun. You want some parchment paper so that when you use the glue later it won't stick. First thing you do is you go and you draw out a rough, just a very rough sketch of what you're going to do to cut out the plastic. Not too important to be terribly detailed at this stage. You just want to get a basic outline. When you're drawing wings, what you want to do is from that point at the top, make sure that your wings are coming out in the arrow shown. Use that point as your starting point for the lines for the really long feathers. What you don't want to do is having the lines going all parallel to each other up to the bird's neck. That is a no-no. From here, you want to continue drawing out the basic shape of the phoenix. Make sure that you have a wide, flat base when you're doing this because you do want it to be able to stand. And if you have been collecting for a while, you remember the first Phoenix Marvel Legends came with a similar kind of stand of like what we're making here. The only thing I didn't like was that the wingspan was very narrow. Later, they came out with the Marvel Select version, and that was a better offering, and it's definitely had more of a presence to it, but it's kind of expensive right now, so I figured I'd make my own. Also, I wanted something with a huge wingspan. When you're done, your basic shape should look like this. Nothing too detailed, just a rough idea where to cut. Then, start cutting. The piece of plastic that I'm using here was from the Marvel Legends, I don't know if it was a 5 or a 6 pack, the one that had the A-Force. So that was a particularly nice big piece of plastic so I can get a wide wingspan. If you don't have something quite so big, not to worry. In a pinch, you could glue a couple of them together, cut out the wings individually, and then glue them together. When you first cut it out, just cut out the basic shape. Don't worry about getting those fine details. Go back and do that later. It's going to be a lot easier than if you try to do it all as one piece. And then when you're done, it should look something like this, where you can cut into it and get those sharper angles. As you begin to cut out the bigger feathers, remember that they're on an angle. They curve outward toward the tip of the wing. Don't cut them completely straight, and don't cut little triangles out. It's going to draw attention to it. Rather, as you're slicing down, make sure that you are either moving your piece of plastic or you're moving your scissors like I'm doing there. That's going to give you that curved look. And if we refer back to the drawing that we had, you can see that they curve outward toward the wing tip. Once you're done cutting out the individual feathers, you want to go back and shape them up a little bit. Otherwise, it's going to look like you cut feathers out of a perfectly round cut. What you don't want them to do is look like they were all molded from the same thing. So the feathers should come to be slightly different lengths. And try to approximate randomness whenever you possibly can. So cut off those major edges. Randomness is hard to fake. We have a tendency to want to make things more symmetrical, and that's just not how nature looks, particularly fire. This means that you'll purposely have to go back and make a couple of feathers shorter than you would have thought would have looked right at the first time. When you're done, they should look something like this, where they curve upward and have a bit of a point going again toward the wing tip. When you have your basic shape, take a step back a little bit, and then you're going to notice things are going to pop out at you. So hold it back, get some distance between it. If you've ever done any kind of painting, you always want to step back and make sure that you're not getting bogged down in the details. Also pay attention to the negative space. That's what's really going to make this thing pop, is being able to have those in-between spots, in between the feathers, where the light's going to shine through. So that's super important in this piece. From here, I'm going to put down some parchment paper for two reasons. The first is the white background is going to be easier for me to paint on and see what I'm painting. It also means that I'm not damaging my cutting board. And then another reason is I'm going to put down some hot glue, which comes right off of the parchment paper. So I guess that's three reasons. Okay, I lied. The first paint that I'm putting down is just a burnt sienna, which is a nice, rich, reddish brown color. And you might look at the fire and you think, oh, it's all reds and yellows and oranges. But it's that contrast that is very important. A lot of amateur artists, what they do is they put all highlights. And when everything's a highlight, nothing is, just kind of like what they say in The Incredibles. If you pay attention too, you'll notice that the flame from the head is going in the other direction. So I'm painting the back of this right now. This piece is intended to have light shown through it. So this is going to be just the base layer so that you can see some of that dark. By putting down the dark first, it's going to make the bright yellows and reds really pop out more. And it's going to draw your eye to it. And if you're using it for any kind of photography, the camera kind of gets tricked and it likes that contrast, so it's going to make it look good. I'm blocking in some color right now, just using a cad yellow medium. And if you notice, I'm also holding the brush fairly high up. The reason for that is, one, I want a very flowing feel. And I spent years painting where I'm holding down toward the... By holding it higher up, it lends more fluidity, also makes you paint a little bit quicker, and then you'll find that some of the accidents that you would have never painted if you were up there controlling the brush are some of the things that you're going to love the most. So I highly recommend that you just let it be a little bit freer. This is the second Phoenix Force that I've painted, and the first one I decided did not have enough dark and contrast, so I just put down some black, mixing it with the red on top of the burnt sienna, which is really going to give it that nice burnt feeling that I want at the edges. And I'm quite taken with the effect. It's very simple. I'm literally only using 5 different colors if you include black and white. So there's the burnt sienna, the yellow, the red, black and white, and that's it. And I think it gives it a nice fire effect. Again, this piece is intended to be backlit. Once that's done, it's going to make it look like there's actually fire that is producing light onto the figures that are in front of it. And because of that, it's important to, one, not paint completely solid. You want some of those specks to show through so that they can actually have that light source. The other thing is that you might want to water down your paints so that way it's not being too thick. And I wouldn't suggest putting a ton of different layers. You want to just throw some paint on there that's going to suggest the fire. By having the light behind it, that's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So don't get too bogged down in going over it and over it and over it like you might do in some other acrylic paintings. In its most intense parts, the fire is nearly white. It's a bright, bright, bright yellow. So I'm laying down pure titanium white here. Your eye is going to blend the two together when it's laid right next to the yellow. However, with any kind of highlight, you always want to make sure that you're using it sparingly. You don't want to go too thick and too heavy-handed. I know that the chest here is fairly white, but I'm going to cover that up a little bit so that it's not too robust. And this being a translucent figure, I am kind of just seeing through, looking through the other side to see what is showing through on the other end. And again, not too important to make sure that it's completely 100% covered, but you do want a fair coverage. You don't want them to look through it and see that it's plastic. Little bits here and there, yes. Huge chunks, no. At this point, if you've done your low areas, the darks, and you've done the highlights, if you squint your eyes, it should begin to take the shape of fire. And then in just a bit, we're going to go over how to put on those little details that are really going to sell it as being fire. What I want to show you now is the first one that I did in comparison. You can see that the feathers are much more red. They're still significantly darker than the middle portion or the top part of the wing, but they don't quite have the contrast of what I have here. Additionally, you might have noticed that I did not mention the color orange, even though this is a primarily orange fire. And the reason for it being, of course, that yellow and red make orange. I found that unless you get the right shade of orange with acrylic, it doesn't quite look right, and it just tends to look a little bit pale. So I figured I'd just use the yellow and the red, and then it would blend together just nicely enough. Now I'm painting the base so that it has something to stand on. I just took another piece of the same plastic and cut out an oval wide enough for the bottom portion. And this I'm going to paint a little bit differently. It's mostly going to be dark, so this is just black and red that I'm putting down, which already almost has a bit of a lava feel to it. Don't forget to use the blacks when you're painting fire. And clean off your brush in between, because now I'm going to go for some straight up yellow. Do not overblend this. And make sure you have a clean brush, because if you are having any black and yellow get together, it can cause a green. But without it, it's a nice ember kind of effect. Let's take a quick look at the first one that I did. And you can see all of the hot glue. This is what we're going to move on to now, the hot glue section of it. For those of you a little bit younger, I do recommend adult supervision. Absolutely, safety first. I also want to point out one of the mistakes that I made with the first piece. If you look at the bottom portion of the glue, you'll notice that it's kind of symmetrical. Each major flame is about equidistant from the last. And for my next go out, I want to try and be a little bit more random and not have it quite so symmetrical, because I think the eye picks that up. So first thing you do with the hot glue is draw a straight line. So it's easier if you have either a ruler or some sort of straight line that you can see through the parchment paper. Again, you want to use the parchment paper because it won't stick to that. You can pull it right up. Your straight line, you're doing that because that's going to be your base. It'll be easier to lay that down vertically so that it doesn't just wobble all over the place. And here, again, try to be random. Believe it or not, it's actually more important that they don't come to the same height. Mix it up a little bit and maybe even go a little bit faster. Make some mistakes on purpose. You're going to find it's going to look a lot better in the end. In the interest of being random, I'm going to make one that I think is way too long. Right here, go all the way up. And then I'm going to go back and fill in some of that negative space, but you want to make sure that you're leaving the hole so that you can see through it. That's what's going to give it the visual interest. If everything is just a block, it's going to look like a cardboard background. So the nice thing about the hot glue is, one, you can play around with it. It's going to leave that negative space, and it's also translucent, so it lets the light pass through it more easily. I stopped painting to work on the glue to allow the paint time to dry. I am using acrylic paint, which literally dries in minutes, but you do want to make sure that it's dry before you flip it over. Now that we have flipped it over, we can go back and do some of the detail work. I'm still using the same 5 colors that I was using before, just filling it in, trying to get more of that fire effect. When you are painting your fire, you can paint little S patterns, which are going to give it that fire effect. Go over with a couple of different layers, but not too much. You can see down at the bottom, just did some swirlies, some S's, and it looks okay. And then for the other ones, it depends on what you're painting. The more violent the fire, the more choppy the strokes you might want to use rather than those long flowing ones. So in this particular one, you'll see that there is a combination. The wings have that choppy effect toward the center, and then the long swirls toward the end of the feathers. The bottom, representing more of the tail of the phoenix, has just the long swirls. And you'll notice that you can barely pick up the white that I did before. So I'm just going back and putting in some little bit of highlights where I think it's going to show up the best. And don't overblend. You want that contrast. It might look like it's really sticks out when you're first painting it, but give it a second. Let it kind of sink in, and I think you're going to like the effect a little bit more. So don't be too keen to blend everything, because the magic happens in the contrast. Even when you're taking your photographs, you're going to find that you want to put some extra contrast in there usually. And if you remember all the way back to the beginning, I had traced it with an orange Sharpie, and now at the very top of the wing you can start to see that outline of the orange Sharpie. So that's why it's important to use orange versus some of the other colors, because if you don't remember to clean up every little hint of it, it's going to blend just fine with the fire, and nobody's going to notice. It'll be just fine. I'm using the same brush throughout this entire project. I didn't feel the need to switch it up. This is just a flat brush, excuse me. I think it's about a 1/2 inch. And what I like about the flat is that if you're using the flat side, you can get those bigger chunky strokes, but you can also turn it on the lengthways, and then you can get some more of a detail, more of like a script brush. So this is just fine. If I were doing something a little bit more detailed, where you actually had to take a look at it, I'd probably switch up and use a couple of different brushes. But you can use any different kind of brush. You can use a flat, you can also use a filbert. A few different things would work just fine for this one. You see, I went through and I covered up that orange line that was up at the top. While I'm filling in the final details for the paint, I want to talk a little bit about one of the figures that I have just sitting there. So in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the Archangel. This was just a bad purchase I got from China. It said that it was a real Marvel Legends, but it's just not. So in a little lesson here that has nothing to do with painting, if something sounds a little bit too good to be true, there's a good chance that it is. So back to the painting, I'm putting in a little bit of white for the details. I want the beak to show up, so I put some white underneath where the neck would be, and a couple little places on the wings. And then, of course, I want the talons to be able to show, so those are just pure titanium white. And this is why we use the parchment paper. Look how easily that pulls up. I literally just pulled it up. I wait for it to dry fully, and came up very nicely. But I'm not done with the hot glue. In the first one, I used a lot of hot glue on the actual figure to simulate some of the fire and get some of that three-dimensionality. I didn't do that as much on this one, although I still wanted some on the tops of the wings and the top of the head. You can do it as much as you like. If you like the look, great. If you want to just keep it a little bit flatter, that's fine too. So I'm going to show you both at the end, and then you can decide which one works best for you. But don't be afraid to just play around and make some random mistakes. That's what fire is. It does not look perfect. I did want the talons to stick out a little bit more, so that's why I'm going down with a layer over them, so that they do look a little bit three-dimensional and hopefully draw your eye to them more. I apologize that the glue is a little bit more off camera than I realized, but I promise you I'm not doing anything special. So this is just the red and black that I'm going to go over with the base layer. I don't want this one to be as robust or draw your eye quite so much. I want it to be more the background. So you're not missing a whole lot, I promise. I'm going over, it's just a little bit of red and black, then a little bit of straight red, and then I'm going to put some yellow highlights on it. When you're painting the fire, don't worry about being too precise. So with the yellow, I'm just kind of dabbing it on there using a stippling technique. It doesn't have to be overly precise. Just get it on there, make sure it's not too gloppy, and then it's going to look just fine. This is what it looks like when it's finished, the back fire piece. You can do as many of these as you like. That's one of the nice things about that hot glue, is you can just layer it and layer it and layer it and layer it until you get a nice feel. The first one that I did, I put one in the back and then I put one in the front. This one I just put one in the back. Often when you use the glue gun, you're going to find that you're going to get these little web-like glue hairs at the end. They come off easily enough. Just kind of pick them off like so. Some of them you're going to want to leave for the fire because they're going to add that wispy feel, but you'll know the difference between the ones that look good and the ones that don't. What you will want to keep are the irregular shapes like the one on the top of this wing. That's what's really going to make it look nice and real. Probably what I liked the most about the first one that I did were those irregular shapes that you see here, those little wispy pieces of fire. Once you've given it a few minutes for all of the paint to dry, then you can go about adhering it to its base. And that we're just going to use hot glue again. We're not using anything special. So glue it just a straight edge along the base. Now hot glue dries super quick, but if you're putting it on thickly, it is going to take a couple of minutes. So you want to do something to prop it up to keep it in the same position. Even with the hot glue, I noticed that it was a bit flimsy, so I'm attaching a little piece of wire, again with hot glue, just so that it stays in place, and that gives it a little bit more stability. I didn't feel the need to do it for the wings, because they're not going to fall over as long as they're attached to the base. They're going to look just fine. After you've attached the main piece of the Phoenix Force, then you can attach your fire. This is, again, the glue that we just pulled up. You can make as many as you want. I only made one piece for this one. I made two for the last one, but that's completely up to you. And now we can see the completed project. The total build time was roughly about an hour, and just wanted to see what she looks like in front of some flame. And here it is in action. This is just having it backlit. This is the one that I made today. I sold the first one, or more accurately, I traded it for the Phoenix Force that's pictured here. I stole this picture from my friend, the one who actually traded it for me. I hope he doesn't mind. I stole it right off of his Instagram. And a little bit of a side note here, I want to go off on a tangent and talk about this guy. He restored my faith in humanity. It was awesome because he liked the work, and then he said, hey, what about a trade? And so we both kind of agreed to trade it with no money exchanging hands. I shipped him this, and he shipped me the Phoenix Force, the Dark Phoenix box set. And it was really nice to know that you can trust somebody that you've never met before. So that was awesome. Now that I've completed this, I can't believe that my X-Men display went so long without having a Phoenix Force behind it. I promise once you finish this, you're going to love the way it transforms your original X-Men. Because you and I both know that the 90s cartoon was amazeballs with fantastic chunks. Well, thanks for watching. If you liked it, I hope you hit the subscribe button. Please feel free to leave some comments if you have any questions, anything that we left out. And hey, check out the links. If you like toys and dioramas, check out our Instagram pages. I think you'll be happy. As always, remember to respect your shelf.